And what are these two political groups in this struggle between the Pope and the Emperor? These two political groups? Guelphs, yes. Whom did the Guelphs support? The Pope, yes. And then the other group that supported the Emperor, they were the G, yes. Ghibellines, yes. Ghibellines. All right, Guelphs and Ghibellines. And each one of these, there's all these little towns and cities in Italy. A lot of them are independent. Really politically independent. Even now, there's still one of these left? San Marino. There's this tiny little city that's like here in Italy, and it's actually still its own separate country. It's just that city and the area right around it. Still technically its own little country, one of the smallest countries in the world. Venice was really it's politically its own country. Rome, the Papal States were their own thing. Florence was its own thing. Anyway, okay, so Guelphs and Ghibellines, they're going on in Florence also. In Florence, the Guelphs have split into two groups. What are they called?
White and blue.
The white Guelphs and the black Guelphs. What's the difference between them?
One wants more Pope, one wants less Pope.
Right, one wants the Pope to have more influence on Florentine politics. Florentine means related to Florence. The other group wants less papal interference. Which one is which?
Black wants more, white wants less.
Right, black, they want more papal interference in Florentine politics. White wants less. Dante, our author, falls into which of these groups?
I believe he's white.
Yes, he's one of the white Guelphs. Okay, Dante is in there. Okay, and this becomes a problem for Dante. Why? What ends up happening to Dante because of this? Because of his involvement with the white Guelphs.
When he leaves, he can't come back because the blacks take over.
Right, he's off on this diplomatic mission. I think actually to the Holy Roman Emperor, not to the Pope. He's on this diplomatic mission. He's one of the people sent on that. And while he's out of town, the black Guelphs take over. And if he goes back, he'll be killed. So he's exiled from Florence for the last 30 years of his life. Okay, that's one of the major influences on Dante's life. What was Dante known for up to this point? Before he writes the work that we're going to read. What was he known for?
Poet.
He was a poet. What can you tell me about his poetry?
He went in
Later Middle Ages, towards writing more poetry and literature, high literature, not just popular music, in the various local languages instead of Latin. And what is this poetry about? This is poetry that Dante writes. What's it about? Mostly. Love, right? Specifically this idea of courtly love. When we talk about courtly love, this is a very popular theme in the literature of the Middle Ages. You see it all throughout medieval literature. I'm trying to think of something you guys might be familiar with. So like King Arthur and his knights, courtly love is a big theme there. Please put the phone away. What's courtly love all about?
tragedy.
Not necessarily tragedy, although often in these tales about courtly love, there's tragedy involved. What kind of relationship are you looking for with courtly love? A sexual relationship?
What does that even mean?
A sexual relationship?
Courtly love?
Courtly love, that's what we're talking about. What is courtly love?
What does that mean?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out. Courtly love.
Marriage.
Not necessarily marriage. Marriage could
Legal
be...
love or something?
Say again?
Like legal love? Like love that you're...
Not necessarily legal, although there's something kind of rule following about it. The very specific way it's supposed to be. The big thing with courtly love is there's this element of distance between the lover and the beloved. There's this element of distance there. And often there's a sort of idealization of this distance there, where you have people loving someone else from afar. in this emotional and almost spiritual way. It's not a physical relationship necessarily, but it's getting so caught up in this love and admiration for the beloved in this ideally pure and chaste way. Right? Chaste meaning sexually pure, not necessarily lacking a sexual element, but if it includes one within the context of marriage. So this is pure love from a distance. Pure, noble, we could say. Noble love from a distance. And so one of the things that happens sometimes with this courtly love in literature is that it goes wrong in various ways. So there's one medieval story about a knight named Eric, and he falls in love with and marries this woman, Enid, and they love each other so deeply and so purely that they spend all their time together, and he never goes out and does knightly things. It becomes a problem. You also have the issue of the King Arthur stories. His wife, Guinevere, very beautiful woman, there's this relationship of courtly love that develops between her and one of Arthur's knights, Lancelot, who's very young, good-looking, polite, friendly. And it eventually develops, it goes over the line of courtly love into a sexual relationship and leads ultimately to Arthur's death. But this is a big theme of literature from this time. When Dante is writing about courtly love, he's not just writing about something that he's read about. He personally has had an intense experience of this sort of relationship. Whom is that with?
Oh, that's the Bernadette, right?
Yes, what's her name? Gotta know her name. Starts with a B. Write it down if you don't have it.
I had it with, don't know. Beatrice.
Beatrice, yes, Beatrice. Beatrice, which the name comes from Latin. It means woman who makes you happy in a sort of religious sense. So even her name, there's a sort of symbolism to it. What was the deal with Dante's relationship with Beatrice? Yeah, from our perspective, there isn't really a relationship.
It's like a spiritual.
Yeah, and it's very much at a distance, possibly even one-sided. Dante first meets her when he's about 9. The two of them shortly thereafter get married to different people. They're sort of friendly with each other, but it never advances beyond that. And this tension here between the pure affection and then the restraint is part of what leads to this courtly love. This experience of it is that there's this tension where you want to reach out and get a sort of more personal connection there, but you're also restraining yourself from it to keep it pure and added. And so then this relationship becomes even more intense. Not only is she removed, not only is he separated from her legally and in terms of distance and all that, but about as completely as you could be, where she's not even in the world anymore. And so it takes on this additional spiritual quality to it, spiritual love. There are some issues with the concept of courtly love. We're going to see some that Dante talks about in his work. Anyway, okay. So the work that we're going to read, what's it called?
Divine Comedy.
The Divine Comedy. This is Dante's most important work, really the only one that people read much anymore. The Divine Comedy, what's it about? Oh wait, first of all, what language is it written in? Latin or Italian? Italian. Italian. Dante's greatest work and most important work, he writes in Italian, not in Latin. And what's it about?
His journey to hell, purgatory, and heaven.
Right. It's about Dante's spiritual journey, or a sort of version of it. Dante makes himself the main character of this work. The character Dante is a bit different from the author Dante. But still, there's an autobiographical element to here. He's telling us about his own life, his own experience, and his spiritual journey. His journey in knowledge and love of God. But instead of just telling us about his thoughts and his emotions and actions and all that, how does he describe it instead? As you said, it's a journey. A journey where? Where does he travel when he tells us this story? As a way of explaining it to us. 3 locations.
Heaven, purgatory, and hell.
Yes, but the other order. He starts with hell, or inferno in Italian. Then purgatory, the place where the souls who are not quite ready for heaven yet are purified. And then finally heaven, or paradiso in Italian. Hell, purgatory, heaven. We're only going to read the first part, the inferno. Beatrice is one of the characters in here also. We don't really see her much in the first part in Inferno, but later on, she becomes Dante's guide through heaven. She died and she went there before him, and she's going to guide him through when he finally gets to heaven and makes his journey there. But in the hell part, we hear about her, but she doesn't actually make an appearance. And so there will be a different guide that Virgil has who brings him through hell. Okay, 1 or 2 quick other things about the Divine Comedy. This poem, and it is a poem, just like the Odyssey was a very long poem. The Divine Comedy is a very long poem also. Let's just talk a little bit about it as a poem. So remember that the Odyssey is broken up into parts. What do we call each part of the Odyssey? Book. Right? The Odyssey is made of books. We don't call them chapters, we call them books. And how many of them are there?
24.
24, yes. There are also 24 books in the Iliad. 24 is a popular number for this kind of thing. There's a different epic poem, the Aeneid, has 12 books. 24 is coincidentally the number of letters that are on the Greek alphabet. So when you're talking about, with people who know Greek, when you're talking about the Iliad or the Odyssey, you don't refer to the books by number, but rather by the letter of the Greek alphabet. So there's book alpha, book beta, gamma, delta, etc. The chapters that it's broken up into are also not called chapters, they're called cantos, which is Italian for songs. Each one is a song. It's a shorter poem within the poem. And they're much shorter than the books of the Odyssey. And the way that they're structured, it's 100, that's a nice round number. This is very intentional. The ancient world, and especially the Middle Ages, people loved numbers. Numbers have all this symbolism to them. We'll talk a little bit more about numbers. But here, in the 3 sections, the 100 are broken up into, so Inferno has 34 cantos, Purgatorio has 33, and Heaven has 33. Although really, when we say 34 for the first one, the Inferno, really, actually I should write 1 plus 33. Really the first canto, he's not in hell yet, and this is sort of introduction to the whole thing. So we could say that the whole poem, made up of 100 cantos, is 1 canto introduction, 33 hell, 33 purgatory, 33 heaven.
Chapter?
Yeah, chapter, right. We call them cantos. Italian word meaning a song.
Yes, but actually it's canti.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's Spanish.
Yeah, well, so in English, we'll often pluralize these things just by sticking an S on the end, like the word. Yeah, it should be canti, the Italian plural. Like when we talk about panini in English, you're like, yeah, let me get a chicken feta panini. But panini is plural in Italian. It means sandwiches. You should talk about a panino. But yeah, so each canto, you talk about multiple canti or cantos. 100 of them. Notice 1, 33, 33, 33. The numbers are important here. What about that number 33? What can you tell me about 33? What's kind of interesting about 33 as a number? We're getting to the exciting part. Go ahead. 33. Well, just look at it. What's special about this number? It's got the same digit twice. And what is that digit? 3. What's special about the number 3? What has 3 points?
The three. It has the three.
Okay, not so much the shape, but it's number 3. What are things that we associate with 3?
Triangle.
Triangles. Triangle is the simplest polygon that there is, a thing with straight sides. Simplest thing with straight sides that there is a triangle. 3. A very stable shape when you're building. When we're talking about Christianity, why is 3 important?
Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Right, the Trinity. The Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or Holy Ghost, sometimes you hear. The Trinity. 3s are very important, and this is a religious work. You know, we talk about it being a spiritual journey. It's religious also. Those two are not, often today, people talk about being spiritual versus being religious. In Dante's world, there's no distinction there. Religion is a deeply spiritual experience, and spirituality is a deeply religious experience. Okay, I think that's enough background about the work as a whole. The same way that before we read the Odyssey, we read some of these background myths about the Trojan War and the different gods and characters involved there. When Dante's writing the Divine Comedy, he's drawing on a lot of different sources. When Homer's writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, he's drawing on the Greek myths that already exist, the stories that his people were telling based on the events of the Trojan War and their own experiences for the past few hundred years. Those are the stories that Homer is using as his material to write the Iliad and the Odyssey. Dante, living much later, living over 2,000 years later, not only does he have the literature of the ancient world to draw on, including Homer sort of indirectly, but also the Christian literary tradition. And already from the 1st century, with the writing of the New Testament, they're very different in some ways, and in other ways similar to Dante. The most important work in terms of Christian literature is going to be what? The most important book. We're talking about Christian literature, and the inspiration for Christian literature is what? The Bible. The Bible. Remember that the Bible is a collection of writings, some of which are as old as or older than the Iliad and the Odyssey. Some of the Psalms, for example, are extremely old. These are songs, poems that were sung in the worship at the temple in Jerusalem that Solomon built and then later was rebuilt. The parts that are very ancient, written over this long period of time, sort of similar to Greek myth. Now, I want to be careful with this, but when we talk about myth, there are a couple different senses we can use the word myth in. One is something that's false. You know, this is a common idea that a lot of people think, but actually it's false. We can say something's a myth. Like, it's a myth that, I don't know, what's a good example of this? Sort of like an urban legend.
Bigfoot.
Okay, Bigfoot would be an example of a myth or an urban legend. But the word myth or mythos in Greek really means story. And particularly a traditional story. One that gets told over the years. So this can include things that are clearly fiction, but also things that are not. Remember, the Trojan War was an actual event. Yes, some of the other stuff later on, the gods, maybe less so. But we want to make sure that we are reading the stories that our authors were reading. If we're not familiar with Greek mythology, which Homer was hearing and his audience was familiar with, we're not going to understand the Odyssey. And similarly, when we're talking about Christian literature, we need to make sure that we're familiar with Christian, but there were all these other works and stories about the church and the saints and Christ and Our Lady and all of these things that they knew about that we don't. We don't hear these accounts anymore. So in order to become familiar with that, we don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think it's worth reading. We're going to read the whole book of Genesis.